Markets Research Team. If you don't know me, my name is Rizwana. I'm a research analyst within the team. I am joined on the meeting or on the line by my colleagues Walter DeWitt and colleagues from the broader research team. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today we take a great pleasure in speaking to the team at the South Africa's Infrastructure Fund. The Infrastructure Fund, as you would know, was announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in 2018, in September of 2018, and the main reason for the fund is to transform public sector infrastructure development and investment, and sourcing effective partnerships with the private sector. Last year, in around August, the memorandum of agreement was signed, and now the fund has been formed and is currently ring-fenced division within the DBSA. We would like to introduce our guest speakers for today. We have the whole team on the line with us, but I'd like to make mention of a few guest speakers. So we've got Mr. Mohale Rakgate on the line. He's the CIO of the Infrastructure Fund. We've got Mr. Jaco Swart, who is the leader for infrastructure finance. Mr. Rakgate is involved leading the team of experts within the fund in order to meet a lot of the operational objectives of the Infrastructure Fund. Previously, he was a group executive of the project preparation division within DBSA and holds a number of postgraduate qualifications from NYU, the University of London, and the University of Limpopo. We also have Mr. Jaco Swart on the meeting today. Recently, he's worked as principal on a number of transactions across several African countries. Prior to DBSA, he was the senior project finance specialist on the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. So that was a bit of a mouthful. And holds several postgraduate qualifications from the University of Stellenbosch, University of Pretoria, and the University of Johannesburg. We're also joined by the broader Infrastructure Fund team. We've got Alan Ridgard on who's head of program management, Ketar and Tao, head of infrastructure finance, Ahajit Druplal JJ, head of asset management and treasury. We've got Flora Marutle Simelane, who's head of legal within the Infrastructure Fund team. Ms. Savene Mngobeni, who is a public finance management specialist, and we've got Shupiri Muede, who's a lead program management, as well as Pam Majola and project administrators Tenjiwe Nchali and Bianca Madela. Apologies if I've missed anybody out. But we've got the whole team here available to present to us and to answer questions afterwards. Before I hand over to the Infrastructure Fund team and the speakers, Mr. Rakgate and Mr. Swart, I would like to remind all of our clients and attendees online, please keep your mics on mute. And you can post your questions on the chat function. Alternatively, at the end, we do have some time available for an interactive Q&A session, should you like to ask this by unmuting yourself. So without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to the Infrastructure Fund team and Mr. Rakgate and Mr. Swart, who will take over and be the next voices that you hear for the next few minutes. Thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thank you very much, Rizwana. My name is Mohale Rakgate. As Rizwana has just introduced, the IF team, and I'm with the rest of the IF team here. But I think how we'll maybe conduct the session, with your consent, Rizwana, is that Jaco will do the presentation. We have a few slides that we'll present. But because the IF team is relatively new, we thought each of the colleagues, and we're not that many, will have an opportunity to show their face, introduce themselves, and talk a little bit about their background, so that the audience can appreciate that the team has been established, and we are currently actually looking at projects. If you agree, we'll do it that way. And we have a way that we normally do, starting with Ajit, and then we'll just smoothly move on the the alphabetical order until we come back, and Jaco will present the few slides, and then we can take questions thereafter. Thank you.
Sure, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mohale. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ajit JJ. I joined the Infrastructure Fund in January of this year, responsible for the treasury and asset management function. I'm formerly a banker, as well as having spent many years in the alternative investment and asset management industry. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be online with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Redgard. I'm the lead or head for program management in the Infrastructure Fund. I joined the fund quite recently, as early as the beginning of this month, and have enjoyed my stay here so far. I'm a former civil engineer who's worked my way up through roads construction, infrastructure construction, transaction analysis and advisory. And it's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon and look forward to engaging. Thank you, Reza.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bianca Madela. I joined the Infrastructure Fund in March this year as project administrator. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Rizwana and your audience. My name is Flora Marutle Simelane, and I head up legal within the Infrastructure Fund. Haven't joined in February this year. I spent 7 and a bit years at Nedbank within CIB. So I see a couple of familiar names and good to be collaborating. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present. As introduced by Rizwana so kindly, I joined the IF formally on 1st of March, but prior to that was in the project preparation division alongside Mohale, and kind of grew up at EY. I'm a chartered accountant by trade. Ended up in the infrastructure advisory team and thereafter at REAP. And yeah, it's been great to be part of the IF, and so far I think we're making good traction, but I'll tell you all about it in a bit. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Keta Rantau, and I am also a CA. I joined the Infrastructure Fund at the beginning of March, and I head infrastructure finance. I'd spent the last, say, 15 years in banking, with the last 11 at Rand Merchant Bank. Thanks.
Hi everyone. I'm Victor Ngobeni. Pam, did I overtake you? Sorry.
No, it's fine. Please carry on, Victor. I'll come immediately.
Okay. I'm Victor Ngobeni. I also joined the IF just now in May, as already introduced, looking at public finance management issues within the fund. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Pam Majola. I'm the operations specialist within the Infrastructure Fund. I joined in January, and I've been with the bank, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, for 10 years. But my trade is more auditing, external auditing, consulting, governance, risk, and management. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Tenjiwe Jali. I'm a project administrator within Infrastructure Fund. I have been with DBSA for the past 11 years, looking after your team admin and project administration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce the infrastructure fund team. So this is the team thus far. We are also, busy with more recruitment. We'll be onboarding around 6 colleagues, from July and going forward. But this is really the core team that is in place and available to engage with the broader stakeholders. But for today, we have a presentation. Jaco will take us through that presentation, and after that, we can have a Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Right, can I just check if it's on screen?
Yeah, on my side, Jaco, it's on screen.
Yes, Jaco.
Sure.
Fantastic, thank you. So a bit of background and formation. The infrastructure fund was formally set up in October, but prior to that, Cabinet approved for it to be a ring-fenced division within DBSA, August 2019, and the tripartite agreement was signed in the form of an MOA between ISA, Infrastructure South Africa, National Treasury, and the DBSA. So the value proposition for us is to apply blended finance solutions and co-funding mechanisms and instruments to infrastructure projects and programs that require partial government financial support to make these commercially viable, and essentially alleviating pressure on the fiscus, which is quite constrained at the moment. So the intention is to enable and increase the mobilization of private sector and local international institutional investment into the public sector infrastructure projects in a structured way. So our partners, of which I've mentioned the two before, is the Presidency, the Minister, and the DPWI, responsible for Infrastructure South Africa, and then the departments and public sector organs, together with the private sector, who we tend to partner with both from a funding and implementation capacity perspective. So the objective is to create a sustainable infrastructure development ecosystem, ideally which will lead to projects becoming bankable, and for us then to accelerate and scale up the catalytic infrastructure development and implementation thereof, by crowding in private sector participation and driving the socio-economic development objectives of the country. So I mentioned ISA, so Infrastructure South Africa, which was formed under DPWI, essentially is responsible for the pipeline. They test factors like eligibility, inform the business plan, and assess projects and move them through the development cycle up to the point where they become viable and require structuring and investment for implementation. The National Treasury have provided the budget allocations, and I'll touch on that in a bit, to actually fund from the fiscus the project implementation, together with the operational costs, or at least 50% thereof, required to capacitate the infrastructure fund team. And then the IF housed as a division under DBSA uses some of the compliance, governance, internal controls, processes, etc., to be able to operate from day one, together with procurement, both capacity and a review capacity, so to enable that ecosystem to be compliant and pretty much clean from a reputational perspective. Then we have an advisory committee called IFSAC, composed of members from both the public and private sector. So government nominees are from National Treasury, Department of Public Works, ISA, as well as the DBSA, who chairs the IFSAC committee. And then the private sector has been done through a recruitment and headhunting process, and will be formal and transparent in the process of selecting and appointing the key participants of IFSAC. And the objective here is to provide transparency in the work that we do, build public sector, financial sector, DFI confidence and trust in the IF, provide access to the private and public sector expertise, relationships and experience, and then promote coordination within the government initiatives and alignment regarding policy and regulatory aspects that need to change or be implemented to enable project implementation, and also allows representation from private and public sectors to make inputs in the working of the IF. So, you know, there's a soundboard, there's government alignment, there's skills and knowledge to draw on, and industry best practice. So, hence the reason for establishing the IFSEC. To take you through the value chain of how we go about implementing projects, as mentioned before, ESA responsible for the pipeline identification as well as support for projects going through the preparation stages as a stage one. Thereafter, when viable, the IF becomes involved in the program design together with the project design, specifically around structuring and the financial aspects required for project implementation. We have some capacity, both internally and externally, together with the skills of the team that's been appointed, and some real life cases on some of the projects that we're working for and with at the moment. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, but where after the structuring process is complete, we take it through the National Treasury budgeting process or the budget facility for infrastructure. It is quite a rigorous process where evaluation is done by National Treasury and outside expertise to test whether these projects are viable and are essentially eligible to receive fiscus funding. In stage 4, once the BFI process is completed and approval is received by Parliament, we would then take the project through the procurement stages. So the IF or the owners of the project can do procurement, with the IF having a no objection and review of if owners do the procurement under their own capacity. And once procured, the IF will then provide funding on a blended finance basis for the project's implementation, where after the concessionaire owner will operate and maintain. And for which in stage 6, the IF will still be responsible for monitoring and evaluating successes and objectives if they are achieved along the way. So as mentioned earlier, in the 2021 budget review, the IF was mentioned as part of a key element for the economic recovery plan, and you know, harnessing skills and capacity from the private sector to improve the quality of planning, speed of delivery, reducing the cost of infrastructure, and in turn contributing to the growth of the economy and increased productivity. So 18 billion has been made available in the medium-term expenditure framework, of which 4 billion is in this year, the in-year adjusted budgets, and thereafter in the MTF 6 and 8 billion to be, I guess, provided for as and when the applications are approved. And so once the budget allocations become available, the role of the IF is to blend the fiscus funding together with other sources of capital. So the idea is to crowd in as much as possible funding capacity from private sector in the form of commercial investors, whether it be commercial banks, international funders, or institutional investors from the asset managers and pension funds, supported by subordinated facilities from the DFIs, MDBs, and donors that provide some credit enhancement through guarantees, tenure extensions, first loss, concessional funding, again blended with this fiscus capital contribution to provide a blended finance facility structured to meet the nuances of each project as they have different objectives and characteristics, and then ultimately support its implementation thereafter. So a couple of highlights. We have an IF core team with different skills available that can be drawn upon, from program to financing, development, and the likes. We intend to be 17 members, and I'll show you the org structure in a second. The IFSEC skills that have been attracted and recruited have gone encouragingly well, with real tangible experience and skills in the infrastructure sector. We have a number of different programs and projects in our pipeline, and we're currently busy with applications to the BFI for a number of these that are due at the end of this month, and again for the later MTF periods at the end of June. We've established a number of processes as detailed in the MOA, and have diligently embarked on finalizing these to be transparent in the way that we operate. We've attracted, or at least gone on roadshow to about 30 different local international funders, and the objective here was to promote the IF and gaining confidence in the activities that we are busy with. And positively received some good media coverage for the IF and its establishment, as well as articulating the objectives that we intend to achieve. So a couple of benefits of partnering with the IF. So the idea is to be able to scale and alleviate fiscal pressure. So we're able to arrange and secure funding with regards to projects and package them in a manner that programs become bankable. We can secure funding on a programmatic approach and thereby maximizing private sector participating. We're able to leverage on IF relationships and negotiations. So whether it's in the private sector and the ability to raise the required capital, as well as negotiating best terms through refinancing mechanisms, as an example. We've got access to experts and a non-blocking team, so we can draw on international expertise, internal expertise, panels of advisors, as well as an unblocking team that exists in ESA that can expedite the ability of projects to secure licenses, permits, in a practical sense. And then risk sharing, innovation, and speed. The idea is for us to appropriately assign risk to the various different parties, to innovate instruments and funding solutions that are different in the way things have been done in the past. And the idea is then to enhance the speed to close and spade in the ground. And then lastly, just a quick sense of the team to date with Mohale as Chief Investment Officers. We've got the 4 heads appointed as Program Management, Infrastructure, Finance, Asset Management, and Treasury, as well as Legal, and then the capacity being built underneath for the team. And that's the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Jaco. I'm not sure whether Mohale would like to add anything to the presentation. Mohale?
Not really. I think it's really comprehensive from our end. Just to emphasize that, you know, as a team, we are working on specific programs and projects to see to, you know, implementation. So though we are new, I mean, 6 months is not a long time in the life of an entity such as this one with big aspirations, you know, to crowd in 1 trillion rand in 10 years of investments. But, you know, the exciting part is that already as a team, we assist more with the implementation side. You know, we can, at a high level, share some of the programs because they are really public knowledge. Both the president and the finance minister, you know, announced them respectively in the SONA and the budget speech. You know, these are projects around student housing, projects in the water sector, as well as projects in the digital connectivity spaces. But over and above that, we have individual projects that, we're getting mandates to implement in a few sectors of the economy. But in terms of the way forward, we will have a transparent engagement, strategy that will implement so that there isn't information asymmetry amongst the stakeholders. So when we are ready with each program to take to market, there'll be a formal engagement strategy that we implement, similar to the IPP program, where formally they engage with the market on a transparent basis. That's all I could add at this stage, but we are available as a team to take comments and questions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. If there are questions, please maybe unmute, introduce yourself and ask the question. Or maybe even raise your hand if you'd like. While we wait, okay, I see we have a few hands. Jones, maybe you can go ahead.
Thank you, Rees. My name is Jones Gondo. I'm a credit analyst at Nedbank Markets. I noticed in the presentation that the types of projects would see government look to guarantee sort of like the mayor's part of debt. But is it right to assume that that's the only area where government's willing to guarantee, or depending on the project, they're looking to guarantee across the capital structure of a project? It would be good if you could clarify or just give your insights of what you found so far in engaging with funders around the use of government guarantees. Thank you.
Maybe, Rizwana, we can take a round of questions, maybe around 3 or 4, and then we can respond, and we do it that way.
Okay.
I think it would be more efficient. Thanks.
Okay. While we wait for more hands or more people indicating that they would like to ask a question, maybe a simple question from my side in terms of the scope of projects that you are investigating. Is it public sector infrastructure? Is it a blended mix of infrastructure projects? What is the scope? And yeah, again, in terms of what, in the same vein as what Jones asked, how is the blending or blended finance structure going to work? Do we have examples in South Africa where this sort of project financing has worked apart from, SOE related guarantees? I see we've got a question from Sheila. Her hand is up. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. Sheila Galloway, Uto Capital. So just in terms of the structuring, will it matter whether it is a conventional procurement process for a particular infrastructure project or a PPP in terms of the projects that you would be looking at providing the blended finance to?
Okay, thank you. So that's 3 questions. If you have any further questions, please raise your hand or even post it on the chat. Mohale, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I'll ask Keta to handle 1 and 2, and Ajith will handle 3. The third question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohale. Thanks, everyone. So in terms of government guarantees and the capital structure, so maybe let's address the capital structure because I think it's the easier of the 2 points. So from a capital structure perspective, the IF and in fact the South African government will play across the capital structure. The whole idea is that we take on the type of risks that the market would traditionally not be capable of taking on. And we are innovative as far as the instruments that would be used to sort of take on that instrument. And that feeds into the fact that we're open as far as where in the capital structure we play. That said, we are not excited about playing in the equity space. And by excited, I mean that would not be our go-to solution. Nothing in our mandate precludes us from playing in that space, but we would rather not play there. So that addresses the capital structure perspective, or gives a capital structure perspective as far as where we play. Then the more interesting conversation relates to government guarantees. So traditionally, and particularly in the PPP space, and we're seeing it even in the IPP space, in the concession space, we've seen that the funding community, and by funding, I mean private capital, has heavily relied on government guarantees. We're also very aware that National Treasury is not necessarily open to issuing guarantees in cases where the instrument doesn't make sense for the fiscus. And let me explain what I mean. So to the extent that the risk can be taken on by the funding community, National Treasury is not necessarily open to issuing guarantees. So if projects can stand on their own 2 feet, or the program has a track record of being successful, or various other instances, National Treasury will not be open to freely issuing guarantees, as we've seen historically. And so one of the infrastructure fund's task, working alongside the likes of Nedbank and the rest of the funding community, is to come up with innovative ways of boxing this risk, where we're not necessarily turning to National Treasury to underpin some of these risks. Obviously, there are instances where you cannot, from a risk sharing perspective and risk allocation perspective, there are some instances where you just cannot get away from NT guarantee, and in those instances, we will lobby for a guarantee. But the underlying response is that the days of the guarantee being the go-to instrument to make deals bankable are behind us. So that relates to the first question. And yeah, maybe just to sum that up, we're looking to work very closely with the private capital providers to come up with solutions that give you a similar comfort. Then, as far as scope of project is concerned, we will look at projects, and maybe let me answer the second part of the question first. Blended financing is not a new concept per se, and particularly in South Africa. So if you look at traditional PPPs and even what's happened in the IPP space, that is a form of blended financing, where you use government funds or some form of fiscus funding to leverage, to crowd in, to mobilize private capital. Blended financing is the use of the two, private and public funding, to make projects happen. And so we've seen that in various forms for many decades in the South African space. We're just formalizing it and extending it beyond the IPP PPP framework. That's the slight difference that's happening. So yes, we've got a track record of successfully doing this within our own country. And our understanding is blended financing is now very topical globally. And we will see the instrument or the methodology, the mechanism being leveraged more now than ever before. So then that brings us to the scope of the projects. We are primarily in place to help government entities, and let's call them organs of states, be it departments, municipalities, SOEs, etc., etc. We are currently being put in place to help these organs of state to get their projects to bankability. So we are bringing the skills, the expertise to help with the commercial case. We're trying to do this as fast as possible. So speed to close, as Jaco alluded to, is one of our key deliverables. The other is crowding in as much private sector funding as possible. And so we will be structuring these transactions such that they are palatable, not just to the traditional infrastructure players like, say, a Nedbank, but we're also trying to cast the net wider. We're looking to attract more international funding. We're looking to tap into the various pools of capital that sit within, say, our pension funds, particularly in South Africa, asset managers, and so forth. And then the last thing is we're trying to do this as cost effectively as possible. So the whole idea is to save the fiscus money. And so the scope of our projects have to have some sort of government element. We don't look at pure private type projects. And then maybe just to quickly close off, and I suspect this will help answer a couple of other questions from a scope perspective, maybe also worth touching on the sectors that we would typically look at. So we would look at energy to the extent that it doesn't fall within the IPP office's mandate. We would also look at water and sanitation, would look at transport, communications, human settlements, agriculture, and agro-processing. We're also keen to get involved in health, education, and municipal infrastructure. And so that rounds up, and hopefully I've given you a holistic answer as far as our scope and where in the capital structure we're keen to play, but more importantly, government's attitude when it comes to the issuance of guarantees. Thanks.
Before I come in, Rizwana, Jonas and Rizwana, have we covered your question or clarification with Keta's response?
Yes,
Yes,
my
thank you
side,
very
yes, thanks.
Sheila, thank you for your questions around the use of PPPs and conventional procurements. I think a comment on PPPs. We haven't seen as many PPPs as we would have liked to have seen come through the infrastructure ecosystem, and that has been the case for many reasons. And I think that the PPP model, there's huge merit in it, but whatever the frustrations or bottlenecks around the PPP program exist, I think we need to revisit that. In relation to conventional procurement, I'm not sure what your guidance is around what you perceive as being conventional procurement, but the procurement process, generally speaking, has to be underpinned by transparency, value for money, and economic sustainability. Perhaps I can pause here for a minute just to talk very briefly and high level as to Infrastructure South Africa's pipeline identification process and appraisal process. So Infrastructure South Africa is chaired by Dr. Ramakgopa, and it's got a few technical working groups, and as part of those technical working groups, in assessing a project, they will embark on what is known as the 5-case model. The 5-case model, we understand, has been used successfully in the UK in their infrastructure office in large-scale infrastructure delivery, and that touches on some of the elements that I've just highlighted, namely value for money, sustainability, economic creation, etc. And that feeds into the conversation around procurement. Now, I think it's public knowledge that, procurement, particularly in large-scale infrastructure, has been not executed to the best that it could be. I think there's a few crinkles that we can iron out. So conventional procurement has been part of the reason for the bottleneck of infrastructure delivery in the country. So as the infrastructure fund, our intention is to use what has worked from the transparent procurement processes, where one goes through a rigorous selection criteria in accordance with the tenders that are published, and that there is at the end of the day value for money for the specific project. We've also got internally within the infrastructure fund a program management unit, which is headed up by my colleague Alan, and part of that also includes making sure that the procurement that one is funding is actually in line with a program or a project that has been subjected to the infrastructure fund processes. Sheila, I'm not sure if I have answered your question or if any further clarification is required.
Yeah, maybe I can add there, Ajit.
Thank you, Molly.
On the question from Sheila. Thank you. Indeed, I mean, triple Ps will look at, in fact, in our pipeline, we have one of the triple P projects, which we may not mention. So definitely would look at, triple Ps as part of the pipeline and look at how innovatively they are structured in such a way that they attract a wider pool of funding. So that could be one element, and also maybe reducing, government, requirement for guarantees. Looking at innovative structures that Keta referred to. So that would be one element. But also, I mean, at the core of the IF is the idea of, catalyzing private sector financing or non-government financing in order to scale up infrastructure development. And to that end, you need to create structures that allow for that to happen. It may be triple Ps, it could be, variations of triple Ps like we have in the IPP programs. It could be concessions. Yeah, so it's a much wider variety of models that we will look at testing. And in reality, that's what we are looking at. I mean, at some of the projects that are in our pipeline advanced for approval. Yeah, so it's wider than that. It wouldn't largely be, on balance sheet. It would be structures outside, balance sheet, on balance sheet, funding of projects. Looking at, crowding in private sector participation at both, development as developers, but also obviously on the financing structures. Credit enhanced by, the 100 billion that is earmarked over the 10 years from government. Thank you, Rizwan.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that, the feedback. Yes, you did answer my question, and correctly, there's not too many PPPs coming to market. However, there are a number of PPPs in the pipeline that actually do have funding gaps and have issues around affordability, and those might be ones that could be earmarked for the fund because they're already on the table at National Treasury.
Agreed. In fact, we have had engagements with the triple P unit, and we do have a few in the pipeline, and they were identified on those bases. Yeah, it's a good point, Sheila. Over to you, Rizwan. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, I see we've got 2 more hands up. So Walter and then Avi, in terms of your questions.
Thanks so much, Rizwana. Thanks so much, Mohale and team. I've got 2 questions. The first would be, could you perhaps, if you think 3 years ahead, what do you think will be your biggest challenges with respect to the infrastructure fund? I think Ajit has touched on some of the issues that you've got, dealing with different organs of state and, the traditional PPP type models and the issues around that. Or do you think it might be political buy-in specifically at different levels of state? If you can just expand on that. And secondly, If you could perhaps give us a bit more color around how the infrastructure fund has been received by foreign investors specifically. Because I do think it would be fair to say that domestic financial institutions would be quite keen to support the program. But as we know, we do need foreign savings, and you guys have mentioned it. If you could just give us a sense of that. And specifically when I mentioned foreign investors, it would be the non-development foreign investors, so I would private funds, private investors. Thank you so much.
And Avi?
Thanks, Reese. Thanks everyone for a very comprehensive and transparent presentation and answering of questions. My question is quite specific on the healthcare space. It is one that you touched on as a focus area. Perhaps if you could share some of your thoughts around what type of infrastructure would be required for the South African healthcare sector. I mean, I've always been of the view that tertiary healthcare is quite expensive, but we have a very a large dependency on tertiary in South Africa, and our primary healthcare system can still improve a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, so Mohale and team. That's the 2 questions for now, and then we'll wait for the other clients and for more questions.
Okay, no, thanks a lot. I think around the challenges ahead, Flora will handle that, and Ajith will touch on the attraction of international, investors beyond the DFIs. And on the health side, Alan will deal with it. Starting with Flora.
Thanks, Mohale. Walter, can we be more positive? I'm sure 3 years down the line, we're hoping to see the rollout of infrastructure, large infrastructure projects, different to what we see today, definitely. And I think to what my colleagues have alluded to, the infrastructure fund's mandate to be innovative alleviates pressure from the fiscus. Project finance, as we know it, it can't be business as usual for us, primarily because we have to accelerate implementation of these projects, and time is not on our side. So just to touch on or elaborate on a glaring challenge, which is really stakeholders. I think that's a big one for us, Walter. I think, with the Infrastructure Development Act having, been put in place, and I think you are aware that there have been certain strategic integrated projects that have been gazetted under that act. They've been 62 to date, if I'm not mistaken. Some examples being the student housing infrastructure project, some of the water projects that TCTA is rolling out. And I think, to benefit from the Infrastructure Development Act, there's certain, the risk mitigation program also was one of the projects or programs published under the Infrastructure Development Act. And I think what that act seeks to do is really shorten the timeframes within which authorizations, consents for REAP, for example, or under the RMIPP program, water use licenses and EIAs, etc. Instead of looking at 107 days, the Infrastructure Development Act requires that any SIP that is gazetted benefits from a shorter time frame in getting those consents and authorizations. So you're looking at about 57 days. Now, having said that, for example, if we look at the water use license, the National Water Act may have different prescribed timeframes as what's the Infrastructure Development Act. So there is the need to align our stakeholders in those provincial or local institutions. If there is a SIP and there's a water use license required, that they give the necessary accelerated time frame in that regard. So that alignment with within the public sector stable, so to speak, is also something that we are working on. And I think the Infrastructure South Africa is the gateway and the entity that is to assist to unblock regulatory challenges, but also assist with the collaboration of stakeholders across the public sector. And I mean, having said that, I think there is, policy and other regulatory reform, which we anticipate that ISA as our primary partner. As you know, or as Jaco had mentioned, we are a creature of a memorandum of agreement. ISA is a primary important party, and their role in assisting us with that is crucial. So definitely unblocking policy and legislative challenges. I think Sheila mentioned PPPs, and I think some of the other audience members mentioned how long it takes to roll out infrastructure projects traditionally, and PPPs, we know it takes about, give or take, 5 to 7 years. And I think with our mandates in place and the need to support government departments in the various stages of the infrastructure value chain, that's the expertise to assist them with that and to roll out projects in due course. I think that's really a big challenge that comes to top of mind, Walter, specifically stakeholder management and unblocking legislative and regulatory reform. Thanks.
No, thanks, Flora. Maybe if I can just add in that regard before Ajit comes in for the second question. I think decoding stakeholder management is important so that we just lay, the challenges bare. And for me, that's the biggest risk. As you could have seen from the, value chain that Jaco presented, the IF value chain, for that to work, you need, the public organs to surrender some of their functions, maybe, or cede some of their functions to the infrastructure fund, around structuring, procurement, and also during the implementation phases, the monitoring. And that's where the biggest challenge would be, for those who want to do projects on their own without capacity to continue to want to do that without coming to the IF. Because the IF is not a structure that would force owners of projects to come through. It's meant to work on the basis of incentives that we have this platform with skills and also financial resources allocated to make it work. The 100 billion that we are referring to, and public organs who have a mandate to implement infrastructure voluntarily should opt into the IF process. And that's where a challenge might arise, that the owners may not do that. And how we really solve for that is by demonstrating success, in the early phases through those projects and programs that we have. And, through a carrot approach, you get more to do. And for me, that's really the biggest challenge. Others are really manageable because there's alignment with the key stakeholders around policy, legislation, there's support from resources to get the skills to solve the problems. The issue is around, owners of projects voluntarily opting into the system. And ours is to demonstrate success and attract them in that way. Thanks, Ajit.
Thank you, Mohale.
Ajit, apologies. Sorry, Mohale. Can I just, sorry, Mohale just actually triggered a thought process. Apologies, Ajit. Walter, I think we dealt with challenges that we foresee or we perceive on the public sector side. I think on coming to the private sector side, based on the question that was asked by Jonas and another Jones, sorry, and another audience member on the government guarantees and, you know, whether that landscape looks sort of similar as what has been used to historically, government being an insurer of last resort. I think that, you know, we've had a number of roadshows and collaboration exercises with the private sector. You know, we've been to Nedbank, ABSA, and other commercial banks, as well as institutional investors, you know, the ASISA, BASA associations, to try and have an engagement and soundboarding in terms of innovative solutions as to how we roll these projects and programs. And I think it's the private sector has a big role to play in that, you know, and I'd like to reiterate, it's not project finance as we know it. And I think any replacement mechanisms in terms of traditional government guarantees, government support, you know, and introducing new products.
I think we have lost Flora there. Yeah. Yeah. But maybe Ajit can come in with his answer. Ajit.
Thank you, Mohale and Rizwana. You know, just to pick up from where Flora was around the government guarantee, and if I may share my view on that government guarantee issue. So, you know, one of our requirements as the IF is also to make sure that infrastructure is delivered, and we also stimulate the economy. I think one of the key drivers of infrastructure delivery in the country is premised on the general economy revival. And if you look at what the rating agencies have consistently put on the table is government debt. And I think it's important that in considering infrastructure projects, we bear in mind that the requirement for a government guarantee sometimes has the collateral damage of increasing government debt, which has a broader implication on the economy. And that's something to be mindful of. And I think what we've also gotten accustomed to is the use of the government guarantee as being a catch-all for all types of risks. My colleague Flora has very neatly led this conversation thus far that it can't be project finance as normal. It can't be infrastructure finance as normal. I think the challenge for advisors, law firms, financiers is to start looking at risk and risk allocation as to what it really is, and try and mitigate those risks specifically and not generally through the use of government guarantees. Flora also touched on our engagement with the investment community. So Walter, coming to your question, our approach on tapping the financial ecosystem is largely driven by speaking to industry bodies within South Africa, that is. So whilst we've spoken to many individual role players, individual banks, individual asset managers, etc., we have coordinated some of our conversations via the likes of ASISA, and in that extent, they have been superb in facilitating conversations, as well as with the Banking Association. So at a commencement point, I think what we want to be is that we want to be transparent with the entire funding community and allow all participants in the funding community an equal chance to consider and submit proposals to fund infrastructure. ASISA did highlight that some of its membership are at different levels insofar as understanding early stage construction risk, and we got to start thinking about how we solution for that as the CISA industry body, as well as individual more experienced members, as well as the banking sector. The banking sector has been very, very supportive of what we want to do. But I'm going to come to these two institutions in a minute. I think the third point, which is very important for us to bear in mind, is that with the changes to Regulation 28, some may argue it hasn't gone too far. Some may argue that there's more than enough room for the pension fund industry to get involved. But we have commenced conversations with asset allocators, pension fund industry participants to draw in the pension fund directly into infrastructure projects. The infrastructure is a natural hedge for the long-dated obligations of pension funds. So it makes sense that pool of capital locally be smartly enticed into the infrastructure projects. in relation to the offshore pools of capital, Walter, the one that I won't talk about is the DFI community. Safe to say that the international DFIs out of across the jurisdictions have been very, very supportive, have committed to the infrastructure fund resources, people, and assistance where required. And I guess we will now test them on the projects that as and when they're brought to market. Insofar, what has been interesting is that we have fielded, interest from large global fund managers to consider putting in funding through equity instruments or near equity instruments for projects, given the long-dated nature of our infrastructure projects. So domestically, most definitely, the interest is phenomenal, and we're grateful for that. But internationally, insofar as the fund community is concerned, I think there is increased or renewed appetite or look-see into what is happening within the South African infrastructure landscape. And I think testament must be borne to bear for what we've done in the IPP space. I think the success of the IPP has laid phenomenal groundwork, or has laid good foundations for us to look at infrastructure differently in the country. But what I must emphasize is that what many of the participants who we speak to raise is project preparation, that in the past projects have not been as successful or reached the milestones they should have reached because of poor project preparation. And to that end, project preparation is getting renewed focus. We've got some phenomenal people in the project prep team within the DBSA, and I think within ISA as well. So that focus is becoming very, very key in order to attract capital both domestically and internationally. And this can't be cliched, but the reality is that some of the IPP projects have actually been very successful, largely because of the good governance and good corporate governance of those projects. And I think it's important that whilst I touched on procurement, general corporate governance around project entities and the corporate health and the corporate governance health of those entities become more necessary and more relevant now more than ever. We do believe that there is a premium that attaches to projects which have good corporate governance, and that is the focus for the infrastructure fund in the implementation of projects and infrastructure projects in particular. I hope I have answered your question, Walter.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Very comprehensive. Appreciate Flora, Ajith, and I'm rooting for you guys.
Thanks, Ajith. Thanks, Rizwana. It's Alan here. So Avi, I heard your question on healthcare, and I think that's a quite a big question. So we either have a 4-hour answer or a shortish answer. So let me start with the short one and see if we can pick it up from there. So in addressing healthcare, we're looking at it from a programmatic approach. We're not looking at it at this stage, specific projects. We are looking to align our programmatic approach with the 5-year strategy that the health department has, and they do have a strategy which includes the execution of infrastructure for this. And how the balance of tertiary and primary healthcare is implemented will be determined somewhat by how the program addresses the strategic goals of the Department of Health. But I think an important driver in rolling out healthcare infrastructure is probably going to be how infrastructure supports the national health insurance goals and initiatives there. And what we would certainly want to try and drive as quickly as possible through the infrastructure fund and through developing healthcare facilities and infrastructure is how we support the rollout of the NHR going forward. So that would be something that we would look at, and that may determine how we prioritize tertiary healthcare infrastructure against primary or vice versa. And once we've got that perspective, then I believe we would be able to sort of package specific projects where the infrastructure fund would look to drive the blended financing solution, looking at how private sector can get involved, and how we can then build up a portfolio of infrastructure assets around this. We also don't want to ignore existing infrastructure. There is a portfolio out there. There's a lot. There's some new, very, very new infrastructure that's being built, and some very old infrastructure. And then there's some areas which aren't addressed at all, with very limited infrastructure availability. So we would need to look at all of these things and balance them up, and work out then how we would assist the Department of Health in executing their plan, and what projects would come first and which ones would come next. So I don't know if that answers your question. Quite general and quite simple, but that's how we're looking at it at this point.
Yeah, maybe I can add there, to say that in fact it's not just the health infrastructure that we are looking at, it's the social infrastructure as a whole, which would include education as well. And really the idea at a simplistic level is to say infrastructure is needed today, there are backlogs today. How do you leverage future allocations so that you can build the infrastructure today? So that's what Alan and ISA colleagues and Project Prep are working on as a model, because there's agency around that model. It's not complicated. The major issue is can we be able to ring fence, future allocations in lieu of capital raised today to implement. Thanks.
Thanks, Mohale.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether there are further questions, but I maybe just have a couple on my side here. In terms of the infrastructure fund, again, the scope, so you've indicated various organs of the state, municipalities, provincial and national department projects that you would seek to support. Historically, what we've been seeing is that municipalities receive an infrastructure grant from the budget, from National Treasury, but they don't end up spending the full allocation. Perhaps because there's capacity issues within the smaller municipalities, or there's a lack of project management in some of the municipalities. So would the infrastructure fund team come in to help some of the smaller municipalities with that? Or is the support for smaller municipalities somewhere else in government, in terms of the infrastructure grants that are provided by National Treasury? And then my second question would be with regards to how the infrastructure fund exists or works with Invest SA, and then we've got Operation Vulindlela within National Treasury. So we have a couple new teams, I guess, within government that are all sort of helping to unlock investment and infrastructure spending and help with structural reforms within the economy. So do you work with these teams? Yeah, those are some of the questions I have. Again, clients and attendees, if you've got questions, please raise your hand or post it on the chat, or you can even email me. Thanks.
No, thank you. I think the first one will give it to Victor around how we can support munis and so on. And then I can handle this one just now around ISA and Operation Vulindlela. I think as we showed on the slide, ISA is a partner through the Memorandum of Agreement, Infrastructure South Africa, and as well as National Treasury. So we have a tripartite Memorandum of Agreement, which is the basis of the establishment of the Infrastructure Fund. And one of the key roles of Infrastructure South Africa is to develop the National Infrastructure Plan, which will have a number of strategic projects, that if implemented would really move the needle from an economic growth and development impact perspectives. So that's their key role. And flowing from there as well, as Flora mentioned, around the Infrastructure Development Act, expediting the implementation process where there are blockages. That's their role as well. And to the extent that Operation Vulindlela, could play a role also in the infrastructure space, there is a potential to collaborate, because this one is responsible for all sectors of the economy, not just infrastructure. That's Operation Vulindlela. So in ISA, we have really a dedicated authority that has just been created with the sole purpose of really coordinating infrastructure development in South Africa. And attended to that would be issues relating to which projects are prioritized, what are the blockages, how do you crowd in partners. And in fact, the Infrastructure Fund is an implementation instrument of government through ISA. So there's that natural, symbiosis between IF and Infrastructure South Africa. And the relationship is quite strong. We are really aligned. We are both new, and we are walking the path together, in our formative stages. I'll allow, maybe with you, maybe being satisfied with this question, I'll allow Ms. Aveni Victor to come in. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mohale. I think the issue of underspending of capital grants in government is not just with small municipalities. It is a problem in general, and it's mainly due to various factors such as program management, contracting, and also the capacity to implement the infrastructure program. And in some instances, it's because the rate of fiscal allocations for those grants actually exceeds the capacity to spend within those municipalities. Now, in terms of linking this with the infrastructure fund, we need to remember that the infrastructure fund will mostly consider applications for projects as they come through. And then once we pick out that there could be instances where we need to support, then we then through the National Treasury budget process, there's a reference for project preparation and so forth. However, I want us to always remember that with the IF, because of the blending requirement, there should mostly always be the capacity to be able to borrow, as well as the capacity to repay the debt that could result from the transaction that comes in there. So normally, as with most banks, it will be transactions with municipalities who have those revenue streams to be able to repay. However, if there's a program that comes through, I don't think we will check it out to say, we will look at it to say, how does it work in terms of structuring. But yeah, I just wanted to say that it is a general problem. It's not just with small municipalities. Thank you.
No, thanks, Victor. And just to add that actually we have a number of projects in the water sector that are currently under preparation, and it's also public knowledge. They are part of the SONA and the budget speech by the minister. They are currently in preparation. And to Victor's point, these projects are located in municipalities, but to the extent that in those municipalities you have mines and industry that would be part of the off-takers, and then you have communities that would depend on government to provide the water or even electricity. There's one project. We then could be blending those projects via the IF structure, where government would contribute for the social use, and we leverage the part that is underpinned by private sector users. Yeah, so there's that initiative ongoing. Hopefully next year around this time, we should be seeing those projects having been prepared. They are currently under our colleagues in the project prep division. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Mohale and the broader infrastructure fund team. I'm not sure if there's any other comments or questions on from anybody on the call. Walter Jones, do you have any closing comments before we end the call? Okay, so in terms of so we've reached almost the end of our conversation with the infrastructure fund team. On behalf of Nedbank CIB Markets Research Division, we'd like to thank the whole team for making themselves available and really fleshing out a lot of the questions that we've had on the call, as well as Jaco and Mohale for the presentation that they've put together. If there are further questions and comments, and with your with your approval, Mohale and the team, we you know, you can always send us an email, and you know, we can always facilitate the engagement with the infrastructure fund team themselves. But thanks so much for sort of highlighting and introducing yourselves as a new team, as a new sort of organ of state within DBSA, trying to change the landscape of SA infrastructure. Perhaps over the next 5 years, we'll be speaking and engaging more often with regards to the developments that you've been working on between now and then. But thank you all for attending. We will send through the meeting recording as well as the presentation material afterwards for those that could not attend, and for you to look through even afterwards. Thanks so much.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for the record, we'll share the presentation through
Thank you.
Reese. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Rizwana.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.